We are back in the apocalyptic literature of the Book of Zechariah today. Apocalyptic literature, in case you don't remember, this is a style of writing that we find in the scriptures. We see it in the Book of Revelation, the Book of Daniel, sometimes in Isaiah, as well as right here in the Book of Zechariah. Now, there's two kinds of visions that we see throughout apocalyptic literature. One of the types is when you kind of like pull back the spiritual veil, and that's really what we saw last time. We were pulling back the spiritual veil in Zechariah's first night vision and just took a look at what was going on with the angels and all that behind the scenes. And sometimes you see visions like that in scripture where it's really just kind of showing that behind the scenes look at what's going on in the spiritual realm. The other kind of apocalyptic literature we see, this is the heavily symbolic one. This is when, it's not stuff that's literally happening in the spiritual realm, but it's symbols that teach us about what is going on in God's plans, what is going on for the future. And so all these things have symbolic meaning, even though that meaning isn't always apparent to us when we first look at it. Here's an example, Revelation 4 and 5. This is that vision that John has of God's heavenly throne room. He sees the living creatures, and they dance before God's throne day and night saying, "Holy, holy, holy." Well, that is something that I think is literally happening around God's throne. It doesn't mean something else. That is what's going on. That would be the first kind of apocalyptic literature. And the second kind would be what you see right afterwards in Revelation 6. You see the four horsemen of the apocalypse. One brings a new world leader who's very evil. One brings war. One brings famine and death. And so when we see the Antichrist show up, he's not literally going to come riding in on a white horse. Okay, that's not what it's trying to teach us. He's not literally going to be carrying a bow and arrows and have a crown on. Probably not, okay? But it's symbolic of other stuff that is going to happen in the future. And it's this kind of night vision that we're going to see today. We're going to look at Zechariah's second night vision. It's the vision of 4 horns and 4 craftsmen. Again, not something that's literally happening, but it's teaching us something about God's plans for the future. So what are the 4 horns and the 4 craftsmen of Zechariah's second night vision? You will find out today on the God and His Prophets podcast. Welcome to God and His Prophets. This is a verse-by-verse Bible study through the Bible's major and minor prophets. My name is Luke Taylor, and as we said, we're going to be looking at Zechariah chapter 1, verses 18 through 21 today. These constitute the second night vision of the book of Zechariah. And so just as a reminder for some context here of what's going on, these visions are meant to give Israel some hope, all right? That these Israelites that Zechariah is speaking to in his book, these are a remnant of Israelites. They were taken from their city 70 years ago. They lost their land. Their temple was destroyed. Jerusalem was burned to the ground. And so it's in ruins. They are coming back all these decades later. Most of them weren't even alive when they got scattered before. But these are a group of Israelites. They've come back into their land. They've been there for a few decades now, like 20, 25 years, I want to say. And they've kind of given up hope that they're ever going to restore Israel to its former glory. So they're kind of saying, why even try to rebuild? Why rebuild our temple? Why rebuild our city? It's never going to be as good as it was before. There's too many people against us, and they've just lost hope. And so Zechariah comes on the scene, he and the prophet Haggai, and they kind of give people that inspiration that they need to get back to work on rebuilding. And, the prophets, we often kind of assume that everybody just rejected their messages, that the prophets, they were sent to speak God's word, but they didn't always do a lot of good because so many people killed or rejected the words of the prophets in the Bible. But thankfully, in Zechariah's case, the people actually listened. I mean, these messages actually accomplish what Zechariah was sent them to do. He was to give the people hope and inspiration and encouragement. And so now people are emboldened to finish the work. And so that's what's going on here in these night visions. Zechariah has 8 dreams that carry a prophetic significance all in one night. And this is the second one that we're going to be looking at today. I think it's the shortest of all of them, only 4 verses long. And so anyway, Zechariah is coming in to share this dream. And the message of this dream is just to say, God sees you, God will help you, God has not forgotten you. And so that's what this vision is going to show. I have to say all that because as we read the vision, it's just kind of weird. Okay, this is just one of those things that it's just kind of like, what is going on right here? Okay, so we'll kind of break it down as we go. Zechariah 1, let me get my verses pulled up here on the screen. Well, if I can find my presenter view. All right, sorry guys, hold on just a second. I'm trying to get my verses to work here. There it is, okay. Zechariah 1, and we'll start here with verse 18. And so it says, I lifted my eyes and behold, 4 horns. And I said to the angel who talked with me, what are these? And he said to me, these are the horns that have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. Then the Lord showed me 4 craftsmen. And I said, what are these coming to do? He said, these are the horns that scattered Judah, so that no one raised his head. And these have come to terrify them, to cast down the horns of the nations who lifted up their horns against the land of Judah, to scatter it. So I know that was just kind of like horns, craftsmen, like what even is this? What is this all about? Okay, so I know that was really kind of strange, but the horns right here, what it's talking about is horns like an animal's horn. Or you might think of the trumpets in Israel's day was a shofar, all right? And so those were made from an animal's horn. So you kind of think of these, that's what a horn is, okay? Now, these are purely symbolic. In the spiritual realm, there's not these horns popping around that are oppressing Israel in the spirit realm. Now, these horns represent something else. And then it said there are 4 craftsmen, and the 4 craftsmen, it said, are going to bring judgment on the horns. The horns are nations who oppressed Israel throughout its history. The craftsmen are God's instrument of judgment that he sends along to punish those nations. And so, again, the purpose of this vision is to show God's people that God sees you. He sees everything that happens to you. He's going to punish the wrongdoers who have hurt you. God will always punish Israel's enemies. And that was really kind of the point of last week's, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, but the first night vision, that was kind of the point of that vision too, was to say, I've seen what people are doing to you, and they're going to answer for it. They're going to be punished, all right? So the 4 horns are 4 nations who have oppressed Israel, and the 4 craftsmen are God's instrument of judgment who will punish those nations that have oppressed Israel. I know that sounds kind of textbook and dry, but that is basically what is going on right here. Now, why horns? Why are horns representing the nations who oppressed Israel? Horns, a lot of times, as we see in these visions, and you see this in the book of Daniel, horns are oftentimes symbolic of a leader of a nation in the book of Daniel. And sometimes sometimes God speaks to the leader, and sometimes God speaks to the nation as a whole. But that's kind of what horns represent in these visions, is they represent strength, might, power. And so the nation and its leader, that's what often the horns are. And God says here that these 4 nations are going to be punished by these craftsmen that he will send along. A craftsman is like a builder or a blacksmith or a carpenter. It's a Hebrew word that is harasim, which means a craftsman in wood, metal, or stone. So craftsman's a pretty good translation. It's somebody who makes something with his hands. And so the instruments of God's judgment, this could be a person, it could be a nation. The person that he sends along to defeat these nations, these are called his craftsmen. Why does God use craftsmen for this symbol? I will talk about that as we get to the end of the episode today. But maybe you're wondering, okay, who are the 4 nations that punished, that oppressed Israel? Who are the 4 nations that God is talking about here when it talks about the 4 horns? Well, I'm going to give a couple of views on this, and I'm going to call one of them the historical view, and the other one the prophecy panorama view, okay? The historical view says that it is 4 nations who have oppressed Israel in its history up to Zechariah's time. And so there were indeed 4 nations who you could say had oppressed Israel in a significant way up to this point in Israel's history, starting with Egypt, okay? And we all know the story of how Egypt kept the Israelites bound there for hundreds of years as slaves for them, and Moses got them set free and all that. But Egypt would be the first one. Second one would be Assyria. The third one would be Babylon, and that was who came in and destroyed Israel 70 years ago at this point. And then the fourth one would be Medo-Persia, and the Medo-Persian Empire. These are the ones who came along and are in charge right now at the time that Zechariah is writing. So this would be the historical view, that the four horns were Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and Medo-Persia. And then the four craftsmen would be the four who came along and punished those nations. So first would be Assyria, because they punished Egypt. Assyria defeated Egypt, and then Babylon defeated Assyria, and then Medo-Persia defeated Babylon, and later on, Greece will come along and defeat Medo-Persia. So that's kind of the historical view, if we want to take it that way. And that's a fine view. The reason I don't take that view is because it said here, and let me go back up in one of the verses. It said here about the four horns. These are the horns that have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. I don't know anywhere that Egypt, and I don't think Assyria, ever attacked Jerusalem. So I don't take the historical view. It's fine if people do. What I prefer is what I call the prophecy panorama view. Okay, a panorama is like when you take a step back and you take everything in. All right, the prophecy panorama view would say that these four horns are the four nations that are the same four nations Daniel often wrote about in his book. Four nations who had a significance in prophecy going from the time of Daniel all the way up to the time of Jesus' second coming. Okay? So the prophecy panorama view, it says that this night vision is depicting everything basically from Zechariah's day all the way up to the second coming of Christ. And who are the four nations or the four horns under this view? Well, it would be Babylon would be the first one, and then Medo-Persia, then Greece, and then Rome. And so I like the prophecy panorama view because it really just, it fits so well with what Daniel taught us about the future. And a lot of what Zechariah, his visions and his prophecies that he gives, a lot of them are forward-looking to the second coming of Christ. We're going to see a lot of prophetic stuff about second coming of Christ throughout this book. And so let's look over at the book of Daniel and just kind of take in what Daniel was telling us about nations who would rule the world from his time all the way forward through the future. And so if you have read the book of Daniel, you might be familiar with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. In Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and in this dream, he sees a great statue. I'm going to put a picture of it up on the screen, and I won't read all the verses. Daniel 2 is like a really long chapter, so I won't read all of it. But Nebuchadnezzar's having this dream. He says, I see a statue. The head is made out of gold. The chest and the arms of the statue are made of silver. It has belly and thighs of bronze. And the legs are kind of interesting. Legs of iron. But then as you get down to the feet of the statue, the feet are still made of iron, but also mixed with some clay. And then at the end of his dream, a huge rock comes down. It strikes the feet of the statue down there where there's the iron mixed with clay, and the whole statue comes crashing down. And that is how his dream ends. Oh, and then the mountain, the stone turns into a mountain that covers the whole earth. So I'm just condensing a lot of that, but that's basically what he sees in the dream. Now, then Daniel comes along, and Daniel gives an interpretation of this dream, telling Nebuchadnezzar what exactly it means. So let me pull that up here. Daniel 2, I'm going to start at verse 37. This is what Daniel tells to Nebuchadnezzar. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. And then it was quite a fancy preamble there from Daniel, but he's telling Nebuchadnezzar that on that statue you saw, you are the head of gold. So Nebuchadnezzar and also his whole kingdom, which was Babylon, that was the first part of the statue, the top of it. That's where Daniel started. That was his day. Babylon was ruling the world. And in Zechariah's terms, this is one of the horns that scattered the Israelites, because Babylon literally came in and decimated Jerusalem and took the people away from their land. So this is one of the oppressors of the Israelites in Zechariah's dream as well. Daniel 2:39. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. So I'm going to pause there. So Daniel mentions two kingdoms there. Now remember, the second part of the statue was that it had a chest and arms of silver. This was the next kingdom to come along after Babylon, and this was called the Medo-Persian Empire, a conglomerate of the Medes and the Persians working together. They are the ones who defeated Babylon. Babylon, which was thought to be indestructible and ultra mighty, and the whole capital fell in one night. The Medo-Persian Empire is represented by the chest and arms of silver, just as there's two parts of this empire. This part of the statue had the two arms, Medes and Persians. Then the third kingdom was Greece. This is the kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Greece was led by Alexander the Great. He came in very swiftly, conquered everything, and took over the world at that time. And so he was the third kingdom. And then verse 40, and there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things, and like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. So the legs of iron, this represented the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was kind of split into two parts. I'm trying to go from memory here, but it had two capitals, basically, an eastern and a western side. And I guess one was Rome, Italy, and the other was Constantinople. I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong, but I believe those are the two. So the Roman Empire was kind of divided into two parts at the same time. And if you know Rome's history, it was never defeated by another kingdom later on. But what Daniel prophesies is that at the end of time, at the time of the Antichrist, and just before Jesus comes back, we're going to see a revived Roman Empire. And this is what he talks about as you get down to the feet of the statue, and you will see the feet are partly iron and partly clay. This will be the revived Roman Empire, but it's not going to last very long. That's why it's pretty soft and mushy, the iron mixed with clay. So it's got remnants of Rome within it. But if you imagine literally a big, heavy statue made of lots of kinds of metals, and you get down to the feet, and the feet are made of clay, you know this thing is not lasting very long. And this represents the fact that the kingdom of the Antichrist will only last 7 years max before this whole thing comes crashing down. So Daniel 2:41, and as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. Verse 42, and as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. Again, it's only lasting 7 years. Verse 43, but as you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And then verse 44, to kind of wrap it all up, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Because the kingdom of Jesus at the second coming of Christ, he is this stone that came in and struck the feet of the statue, knocking the statue down. When Jesus returns, he is going to destroy the Antichrist kingdom and wipe it all away and set up his own millennial kingdom here on the earth. And so it will cover the whole earth, and it is one that will not be destroyed. That's why it's a kingdom not made with man's hands, because it's made with God's hands. It's the kingdom of God coming down to fill the entire planet. Now, a lot of people take these dreams and visions, like in the book of Daniel, symbolically, and they say this is talking about the church spreading across the world. I take this more literally, that I believe someday we will see a revived Roman Empire, and it is going to be literally all wiped away when Jesus comes back. And at the second coming, the Antichrist will be wiped out. We're going to see this in another part of the book of Daniel too, Daniel chapter 7. And I'm not going into all the context of all this stuff as deep as I could in Daniel. Maybe someday we'll do a Daniel study. But what I'm trying to do right here, I'm assuming or hoping that some of you have heard this before. Like if you're doing a Zechariah study, Most likely you've already looked at a lot of other prophetic teachings, and you're kind of familiar with what Daniel teaches about the future, and hopefully what Revelation teaches about the future. And so, like, Zechariah is not the first book I would recommend people going to put all this together. I would recommend starting with Revelation, to be honest. I think if you can get Revelation down, it's very understandable if you go through it slow. Once you got Revelation down, I mean, then you can kind of see where Daniel and all these other prophetic writings, where they fit into Revelation's story. So, and which makes sense. Revelation is the unveiling. It's it's putting all that stuff together. So that's a great place to actually start. Then we can go back into books like Zechariah and Daniel and look at all these individual parts. So Daniel has his own night vision, his own dream in chapter 7, and we'll look at verses 2 through 12. He's also having a dream about 4 future kingdoms who are going to dominate the world until Jesus comes back. It's going to perfectly mirror what we saw with the dream of the statue in Daniel 2, but in Daniel's dreams, he sees 4 different animals coming out. And so first is, let's see, I clicked on the wrong verse, sorry. Daniel 7:2 is where we'll start. So Daniel declared, in my vision by night, and behold, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. Let me stop right there for a second. So what's Daniel seeing right here? He is actually seeing the events that took place in Daniel chapter 4. Chronologically, and in the order in the Bible, that had already happened before Daniel 7, but Daniel 4 is about when King Nebuchadnezzar, because of his great pride, he was made to live as a wild animal for 7 years. He lost his mind for 7 years. And so after 7 years, he repented, and God gave him his clear mind back. And Nebuchadnezzar realized that he had been arrogant and dumb, so that's why it says here, he is this first kingdom, though. Babylon is this first creature, the lion with eagle's wings. And if you look in Babylonian architecture, you will see that they often, like the symbol, the mascot, you might say, for Babylon was a lion with eagle's wings. And so the symbolism of this vision would be very clear to the readers of the book of Daniel. This lion represents Babylon, and the fact that its wings were taken off and he was made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. Well, this fits perfectly with Daniel 4, where Nebuchadnezzar is given his sanity back and goes back into leading Babylon. So that is the first creature. Babylon is the first creature. And as you see, sometimes when these visions are happening, sometimes it's speaking directly about the person who is the leader of this nation, and sometimes it's speaking about the nation as a whole. So you could say it either way, but the lion here is Babylon / Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 5. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. Right here, this is talking about that Medo-Persian Empire that came along after Babylon. And so it said it was raised up on one side, or it might say in some translations, one side of the bear was bigger than the other. Well, this is talking about the fact that the Persian side of the Medo-Persian Empire was much larger than the Mede side, but it was a two-pronged beast right there. So that was the second nation. The third one here is in Daniel 7:6. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Right here, this leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, this refers to Alexander the Great and his leadership of the nation of Greece, and how they conquered the world very swiftly, very quickly. And so that's why it's a leopard, because it's a very fast animal. Alexander the Great, in like a 10-year span, 10 or 15 years if I remember right, he's a very young man, and died in his early 30s, conquered the entire known world at that time, and conquered it for Greece. When he died, his kingdom of Greece was divided up among his 4 generals, and so that's why it becomes a beast with 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Verse 7. This is the Roman Empire. After this, I saw in the night visions I always imagine this one as like a T-Rex because it doesn't really say what it is. Behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful, and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay, so all these creatures are kind of freaky. I mean, like a four-headed leopard. I know they're all fantasy creatures basically, but this is all symbolism, okay? But this one right here is like this. It doesn't even say what kind of animal it was. It just said it was a dreadful beast that trashed everything else. In verse 8, I considered the horns, but this is the kingdom of, this is Rome, okay? The Roman Empire. But again, in describing this Roman Empire, Daniel jumps to the end of time, to when it's the kingdom of the Antichrist. And so when it says that this T-Rex, if you want to say, when it has 10 horns on its head, this refers to the fact that initially the Antichrist kingdom is going to be divided into 10 parts with 10 kings. We know there's 10 leaders. I guess I don't know if it's in 10 parts, but we kind of assume that. But it has 10 kings, 10 leaders over the nation of the revived Roman Empire, the kingdom of the Antichrist, and 3 of them are going to be killed. So let me just read this. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, which is the Antichrist, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in his horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And so let's see, that was verse 8. Okay, so I kind of explained what all these things are as we were going through the vision. But again, we saw that there were 4 nations right there in Daniel's vision: Rome, Medo-Persian Empire, Greece, and then Babylon. I got those out of order. It started with Babylon, it ends with Rome. But those are the same 4 nations, the same ones that Daniel chapter 2 was writing about. Daniel 7 talks about them again. By the way, these visions, these prophetic descriptors of what was to come in the future, even though not all of it's happened by this point, because the Antichrist revived Roman Empire part still hasn't happened. But this was so perfectly depicting what would happen to planet Earth in the years after the book of Daniel was written. There are a lot of, I guess, atheists, atheist scholars, historians, non-Christian historians. That's what I want to say. There's a lot of non-Christian historians out there, and they will not believe, they refuse to believe that the book of Daniel could have been written before these things took place, because they so perfectly describe everything that happened in world history, especially in that Middle Eastern region, for the next several hundred years after Daniel was alive. They say it's just too perfect, basically. They say it's too perfect, like there's no way anyone could have known about all this stuff in advance, so he must have had, this must have been written after the fact. But there are some reasons that we can prove that like these things were written in Daniel's time. Here's a proof. The book of Ezekiel, which was, Ezekiel lived at the same time as Daniel. They were in different places, but Ezekiel mentions Daniel, I want to say, in chapter 15. And so that's a proof that like people knew about Daniel back in Daniel's day. This isn't some guy who came along hundreds of years later and tried to rewrite history. Like people knew about Daniel and that he was a real special guy. There's some other proofs that you can look at to prove that Daniel was written by Daniel. But anyway, a lot of people just won't believe it. They refuse to believe it because these visions of the future are just too perfect for a lot of people. So anyway, I think I wanted to keep going. Yeah, let's look at how this vision ends. I want to read 4 more verses, Daniel 7:9. As I looked, there were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Jesus, okay? Jesus is the Ancient of Days. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. At the end of the Roman Empire, Jesus comes on the scene, just like we saw that stone strike the statue before. We see Jesus showing up here at the end of Daniel's dream here too. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. Okay? When Jesus shows up, judgment falls. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. And as I looked, the beast was killed. This 4th Roman Empire, the beast, the Antichrist. If you read Revelation, I think 19, Beast and Antichrist, the Antichrist and the false prophet are the first two guys thrown into the lake of fire for all eternity when Jesus comes back at the second coming. So as I looked, Daniel 7:11, as I looked, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. The Antichrist and his kingdom go bye-bye. Verse 12, as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time, which we could interpret that there is going to be an Egypt in the millennial kingdom of Jesus. It'll make it in, and the Persians and the Greeks, I guess will too. So we do read some prophecies about Egypt during the millennium, and that they get along with Israel. You kind of have to by that point because Jesus is king of the world. But anyway, I won't spend too much time on verse 12 there. I just want to point out here, like we see that the Roman Empire, okay, it's this fourth beast, and yes, it existed in Jesus's time, but it's going to come back with the 10 kings. The Antichrist will rise up from amongst them. He was that tiny horn speaking great things, is what it said. And the Antichrist is going to be the one that Jesus drop kicks into the lake of fire at the time of his second coming. And so that is Daniel's prophecy panorama view, all right? This is what I would say that Zechariah is basically referring to also. These are my names, okay? The historical view and the prophecy panorama view. And I've kind of made a cheesy, cheap little graphic. I mean, I just threw this together in 10 minutes on my computer, but it's a picture of 4 horns and then 4 craftsmen. So under the prophecy panorama view, here is what the 4 horns symbolize in Zechariah chapter 1, the second night vision, okay? The 4 horns would be the same 4 kingdoms that Daniel kept prophesying about: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, okay? The 4 craftsmen who came along, these are the 4 instruments of God's judgment. Well, these would be the 4 nations who come along and destroy the horns, destroy those who scattered Israel. So the 4 instruments of God's judgment, Persia was the first craftsman because the Persians defeated Babylon. Greece was the second craftsman because the Greeks defeated Persia. The Romans were the third craftsman because the Romans defeated Greece. And then Jesus is the 4th craftsman because Jesus will defeat Rome, the kingdom of the Antichrist, at the second coming. And so that's how I look at this vision of the 4 horns and the 4 craftsmen. Next time on this podcast, we are going to get into night vision number 3. Night vision number 3 of Zechariah is all of chapter 2. I looked today, it's like 11, 12, 13 verses. I actually think we might, and I don't want to promise this because I get into things sometimes and then I slow down, but we might cover the whole chapter in 1 week, which might be shocking because like we spent 4 weeks here on Zechariah chapter 1. And if you might be looking at your calendar and thinking, he's not going to finish Zechariah for like 3 years. Okay, it's not going to be long like that. I did plan to spend about a year in this book, but we will pick up the pace here. Mainly we'll spend a year because I'm probably going to take weeks off here and there. Next weekend, I'm not going to do an episode. I'm trying to I want to help my grandparents get their yard ready and their grounds ready for the winter time. So I want to take a weekend and do that. And I'm not going to try to force myself to pop out an episode that same weekend covering a whole chapter. I'll give myself 2 weeks to study on that. So we'll be back in 2 weeks looking at Daniel chapter 2, perhaps the whole chapter, which will have night vision number 3. Make sure you're subscribed so you can get that episode. And if you do want to get in touch with me in the meantime, again, my name is Luke Taylor. My email is GodAndHisProphetsPodcast@gmail.com. I like that prophecy panorama view because in Daniel's prophecy panorama view, if you noticed, the story always ends with Jesus showing up, defeating the Antichrist and his kingdom, and then Jesus' kingdom overcomes everything. Jesus and his kingdom, they were the stone that struck the statue. Jesus was the Ancient of Days who showed up and defeated the Antichrist. And as you read Daniel 7, he gives his kingdom to his followers to rule over all of planet Earth. In the second night vision, the one that we were just looking at a few moments ago in the book of Zechariah, who was the last craftsman? Well, the last craftsman right there was Jesus. Okay, Jesus is the craftsman to end all craftsmen. And remember, What's another word for a craftsman? A carpenter. What was Jesus' job whenever he was here on this earth? Jesus was a carpenter. Jesus is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords, and he is the carpenter of carpenters. This has been Luke Taylor, and I hope the Bible makes more sense to you after this episode, and I hope that you more clearly see the story of God and his prophets.